Jackson Reed stood at the altar, his jaw clenched tight as he stared at the church doors that hadn't opened yet. In 10 minutes, he'd be married to a woman he'd spoken to exactly 3 times. A woman the whole town called the old maid. A woman who had no more choice in this arrangement than he did. The banker's cold ultimatum echoed in his mind like a death sentence. Marry within the month or lose the ranch. Behind him, he could hear the whispered gossip of the townsfolk who'd orchestrated this whole mess. They thought they knew what was best for him, for his motherless daughter, for his failing ranch. They had no idea what they'd just set in motion. Just 2 weeks ago, Jackson had been sitting in Banker Morrison's office, hat in hand, begging for more time. The drought had killed half his cattle, and the remaining herd wasn't enough to cover his debts. "I've got a solution for you, Reed," Morrison had said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The town committee has been discussing your situation. You need a wife to help raise that little girl of yours, and your ranch needs a woman's touch. We found the perfect candidate." Jackson had laughed bitterly. "I buried my wife 6 months ago, Morrison. I'm not looking for another one." But Morrison's next words had crushed that defiance. "Then you'll be burying your ranch too. Marry by month's end, or I call your loans." All of them. The committee had presented their solution the very next day. Mrs. Henderson, the town's self-appointed matchmaker, had marched into his kitchen with a triumphant smile. "Jackson Reed, meet your salvation. Lillian Hartwell has agreed to marry you." Jackson had stared at the stern-faced woman standing behind Mrs. Henderson. Lillian Hartwell was 28 years old, which made her practically ancient by frontier marriage standards. She'd been the town's schoolteacher for 3 years, ever since arriving from Boston under mysterious circumstances. The children respected her, but she intimidated grown men with her sharp tongue and sharper mind. She was tall, serious, and completely wrong for him in every way imaginable. What Jackson didn't know was that Lillian had her own demons chasing her west. 3 years ago, she'd been engaged to Boston's most eligible bachelor, only to discover he was already married. The scandal had destroyed her reputation overnight. Her father, a respected doctor, had died of shame within months. With nowhere else to turn, she'd answered an advertisement for a frontier schoolteacher, hoping to disappear into the vast Wyoming territory. She'd build a new life, teaching children whose parents could barely read themselves. But she'd never quite escaped the whispers that followed her from town to town. Damaged goods, they called her. Too proud for her own good. And now, at 28, she was facing her own ultimatum. School board chairman Williams had cornered her after classes just yesterday. "Miss Hartwell, the town's decided you need a husband. It's not proper, a woman your age living alone. Some folks are starting to talk." Lillian had straightened her spine the way her Boston finishing school had taught her. "My personal life is no one's business, Mr. Williams." But Williams had shaken his head. "This is a small town, Miss Hartwell. People talk, and when they talk, they make decisions. The school boards decided that unmarried women of a certain age aren't suitable teachers for impressionable children. You can marry Jackson Reed and keep your position where you can find yourself on the next stage out of town." The choice, such as it was, had been made for her. Now, as the church doors finally creaked open, both bride and groom felt the weight of their shared imprisonment. Lillian walked down the aisle in a simple gray dress, her face set in an expression of quiet dignity that hid her screaming nerves. She looked neither left nor right, focusing only on the man waiting for her with obvious reluctance. Jackson watched her approach and felt a strange mixture of resentment and pity. They were both victims of this town's misguided good intentions. Two broken people being forced together like pieces of a puzzle that would never fit. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of barely concealed tension. Reverend Matthews rushed through the vows as if he sensed the explosive atmosphere in the room. Emma, Jackson's 2-year-old daughter, cried throughout the entire service from her place in the front pew, as if she somehow understood that this stranger was about to change everything. When it came time for Jackson to kiss his bride, He barely brushed her cheek, and Lillian's face burned with humiliation. The congregation erupted in forced celebration, but the bride and groom stood like statues, trapped in their new reality. The reception in the church hall was worse than the ceremony. The townsfolk congratulated themselves on their matchmaking skills while the newlyweds sat at opposite ends of the head table, barely speaking. Perfect solution, Mrs. Henderson proclaimed loudly. Jackson gets help with little Emma. Lillian gets security, and the ranch gets saved. Everyone wins. Jackson's knuckles went white around his coffee cup. Everyone wins? He just signed away his freedom to save a ranch that might not even be worth saving. The ride to his ranch was conducted in deadly silence, with Emma whimpering in Lillian's uncomfortable arms and Jackson staring straight ahead at the dusty trail. When they finally arrived at his modest farmhouse, Lillian stepped down from the wagon and surveyed what was now supposed to be her home. The house was clean but sparse, clearly the domain of a man who'd given up on making things beautiful. Jackson carried their bags inside and turned to face his new wife with the enthusiasm of a man facing execution. "Let's get one thing straight," he said, his voice cold as winter wind. "This marriage is a business arrangement, nothing more. You'll have the spare room upstairs. I expect you to take care of Emma and keep the house running. But beyond that, we don't need to pretend this is anything other than what is." Lillian lifted her chin, her Boston education giving her a dignity that frontier life couldn't break. "Fine by me, Mr. Reed, but I have conditions too. I'll need access to books and writing materials. I won't be treated like a servant in this house. And if I'm going to care for your daughter, I'll do it my way, not yours." They stared at each other across the small living room. Two proud people who'd been backed into corners they never saw coming. Emma chose that moment to start crying again, reaching her tiny arms toward her father and away from this strange new woman. Jackson took his daughter with visible relief, and Lillian felt something crack inside her chest. Even a 2-year-old could sense she didn't belong here. "I didn't ask for this," Jackson said quietly, bouncing Emma in his arms. Lillian straightened her shoulders and picked up her single carpet bag. "Neither did I, Mr. Reed. But we're both here now, aren't we?" She climbed the stairs to her new prison, leaving Jackson alone with his daughter and his regrets. Neither of them had any idea that this forced beginning would lead to the greatest love story their small town had ever seen. The first week of marriage felt like the longest 7 days of both their lives. Jackson and Lillian moved around each other like enemy soldiers in a ceasefire, each determined to prove they didn't need the other. Lillian threw herself into reorganizing the entire house with the efficiency of a general planning campaign. She rearranged the kitchen, sorted through closets, and established routines that made sense to her educated mind. Jackson responded by undoing her changes whenever possible, moving things back to where they'd been when his late wife Sarah was alive. It was petty and childish, but it was also the only control he had left in his own home. Emma became an unwilling battleground between them. The little girl sensed the tension and began acting out in ways that broke Jackson's heart. She would cry whenever Lillian tried to feed her, throw her toys when Lillian attempted to play, and cling to her father with desperate intensity whenever he tried to leave for ranch work. Lillian, for her part, approached childcare like a complex mathematical problem that could be solved with enough logic and patience. She read to Emma from educational books, tried to establish proper meal times, and attempted to teach basic manners to a 2-year-old who just wanted her daddy and her real mama. "She doesn't like me," Lillian said quietly one evening as Jackson took a screaming Emma from her arms after another failed dinner attempt. Jackson bounced his daughter gently, feeling her tiny body relax against his familiar chest. "She's just adjusting," he replied, though they both knew it was more than that. Emma represented everything they both lost: Jackson's happy marriage, Lillian's dreams of having her own children with a man who actually loved her. Every interaction with the little girl reminded them that they were both just playing roles they'd never auditioned for. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night when Emma's persistent fussiness turned into something much more frightening. Jackson had just finished the evening chores and was looking forward to his one beer of the day when he heard Lillian calling his name with an urgency that made his blood run cold. He found them in Emma's small bedroom, Lillian holding his daughter with a competence that surprised him. Emma's face was flushed bright red, her tiny body burning with fever, and her breathing was shallow and rapid. "How long has she been like this?" Lillian asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Jackson's hand shook as he touched Emma's forehead. She was fine at dinner, maybe a little cranky, but he trailed off, remembering Sarah's death, how quickly things had gone wrong, how helpless he'd felt watching his wife slip away. "We need to get her to Doc Williams in town," he said, already reaching for his coat. But Lillian's hand on his arm stopped him. "The storm's getting worse out there. Look outside, Jackson. We'd never make it through that snow, and the cold air would make her condition worse." Jackson looked out the window and felt his heart sink. The wind was howling like a banshee, and snow was falling so hard he could barely see the barn. They were trapped, just like they'd been trapped into this marriage, but this time a life hung in the balance. "Then what do we do?" he asked, hearing the desperation in his own voice. Lillian was already moving, laying Emma gently on the bed and rolling up her sleeves. "My father was a doctor in Boston. I helped her with patients for years before." She didn't finish the sentence about her scandal, but she didn't need to. "I know what to do, but I'll need your help." What happened next broke down the first wall between them. Lillian took charge with a quiet authority that impressed Jackson despite himself. She sent him to fetch cool water and clean cloths while she gently undressed Emma to help bring down the fever. She mixed a solution from ingredients in her medical kit, things Jackson hadn't even known she'd brought with her. "Keep talking to her," Lillian instructed as she worked. "Let her hear your voice. Children fight harder when they know their parents are there." Jackson found himself talking to Emma in a soft, steady stream, telling her about the horses, about the cattle, about how much he loved her. And somewhere in that long, frightening night, he became aware that Lillian was talking too, her voice mixing with his in a gentle chorus of encouragement. She sang lullabies in what sounded like Latin, told stories about brave little girls who conquered dragons, and whispered prayers in a voice that shook with genuine emotion. For the first time since their wedding, Jackson saw past her stern exterior to the woman underneath. As dawn broke, Emma's fever finally broke too. Her breathing became steady and deep. Her face returned to its normal color, and she slept peacefully for the first time in days. Jackson